Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Ramsey, how are you?
I'm fantastic.
How was your Labor Day weekend?
It was great. Spent some time down in Florida. Turned 55. Other than that, no big deal.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, my wife had a lot of work cut out for me, and you wonder why I'm this shirt. I'm actually volunteering at our food bank with our crew. So,
nice.
Yeah, I was telling Ben before. I don't know if I'm going to sort potatoes or carrots this time, but whatever it is, I'll be good.
Yeah,
it's good work.
Yeah. So hey, listen, we've got a great team back with us today from our partners and friends at Nasdaq, and today we have Aidan Shue and Ben Jones with the Nasdaq Fund Network. And Aidan, did I pronounce it correctly? Right? Okay. Good. Yeah. Well, and Ben, good to see you.
Likewise, Ramsey, happy birthday, first of all. But no,
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, it's good to be on. We have a lot of great things to discuss today. So thanks for having NFN on today.
Yeah. So let me just state the most obvious question is, what is NFN, and then maybe talk about both of your roles. And Aidan, I'll throw the question over to you to start.
Yeah, definitely. I'll dig right in. So the Nasdaq Fund Network is actually one of Nasdaq's longest-standing data services. So we provide searchable symbols and price discoverability for mutual funds, 529 college savings plans, collective investment trusts, models, UITs, and more. So we receive that nightly pricing information from these funds custodians or pricing agents, so like your State Street, and then we disseminate that NAV data downstream to hundreds of different platforms. So that's Yahoo Finance, Refinitiv, Bloomberg, both retail and institutional platforms. So now you can search up any of these products, a 529 or a CIT in the exact same way you would a mutual fund, a stock, or an ETF, using that searchable symbol. And, we really find that transparency and distribution, it really helps validate some of these growing asset classes like a model, for example. I know Ben's kind of a history buff, so he can dig in a little bit more on the Nasdaq Fund Network history. I'll let him take a go.
And tell us a little bit on that journey. Tell us a little bit about what a model is, an example of a model, and why those are also important. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, Ben. Ben's kind of our model expert. You want to dig in with the models?
So history and models, I love it. I mean, this is why I'm on this call. It gets me excited, right? So again, thanks for having me on. Ben Jones, Senior Director, kind of in a product management role at the Nasdaq Fund Network, and we can get into that in a second. But let's talk history, right? I mean, Aidan said it's one of the oldest data service products at Nasdaq. So what does that mean, right? So the Nasdaq Fund Network used to be called the Mutual Fund Quotation Service, and its history goes back to 1984. It's at that time, right? You had large and growing, mutual fund, open-end fund complex, right? But there was some friction. There were some issues. You had kind of a hodgepodge of different identifiers and symbols that some of the issuers would provide or some of the data platforms would provide. There was no central registration service for mutual funds to provide a standardized identification or symbology for all those open-end funds. And why is that important? Because at that time, what was the dominant mode of communication? What was the medium that was being used? Newspapers. Right? You had a lot of retail investors who were relying on that daily newspaper or that Sunday newspaper to see their mutual funds that they may own in a retirement plan or in their investment account. You would open up the financial section, you would go down and find your fund, and you can look at the fund symbol, the identifier, to see it, right? And so the service started as a way of disseminating those mutual fund quotes and symbols, identifiers out to all those newspapers. And the funny thing there, again, you got the history guy on, so newspapers are actually kind of the center for a lot of financial innovation, right? So back in the 80s, that was fintech. That was like what financial technology was all about. Getting data out there. You had the Bloomberg terminal was beginning to be used. Morningstar was founded, I think, in the same year. But you also found indexes were created because of newspapers, and technical analysis really was revolutionized because of newspapers, all because of Charles Dow. So that's a little history nugget for you guys. So over time, the mutual fund quotation service evolved, right? It expanded outside of just mutual funds, right? So you had UITs, you had some, different annuities, you had some kind of alternative investments, collective investment and trust, and that expanded. And so we rebranded a few years ago from MFQS to the Nasdaq Fund Network, right? And I think that's important, guys, because the last word, network, is crucial. Because what we do is we are a two-sided network where we're connecting data from the asset managers. So think your mutual fund companies, UITs, collective investment trusts, managed accounts, structured products, connecting it with the marketplace, which is your data platforms, your vendors, your broker dealers, your Yahoo Finances, touching institutional investors as well as retail investors.
Yeah. Now, and just for listeners, we're usually talking about annuities, retirement planning. How does this impact our space? Now, discoverability has been enormously important in driving FIA sales. Ramsey, if you think back to the first fixed index annuities, I think everybody was kind of like buying one of these things was like buying a Model T Ford, right? You got the S&P 500. you had 100 different ways to calculate performance, but it really was built around one fund. Now, along come some innovators in this space, and we start to introduce some of these bespoke funds. And the first complaint we heard from advisors in the space was their clients couldn't find the values. We some of these earlier, newer products had, Ramsey, I don't know, is it fair to call them undiscoverable indices to start?
Well, I mean, they were indices that were built from scratch, and so we built them so just for the benefit of the audience, this is a business that I was involved in in a prior career. But so we had to come up with an index, and we had to come up with a way of sharing the values of that index sort of broadly, and so that was not a trivial thing. So it ultimately the service that Aidan and Ben are providing with NFN are really quite crucial, because it was not an easy thing to get the visibility in a lot of different places, for sure.
And that's what we're trying to solve, right? You hit the nail on the head. Is how do you discover, these important investment vehicles that individual investors that are listening who are managing their own 401k rely on, all the way up to institutional portfolio manager at a large firm down in Wall Street, right? They're relying on these identifiers, and so by having a standardized identifier, so Ramsey, like using the index example, like as an index provider, you create the index, you might have an internal code that you use, then you distribute it out to the marketplace. Bloomberg, Refinitiv, Morningstar, Goldman Sachs, Dodge & Cox, they might use their own internal identifiers, right? And then that doesn't even include the retail investor who's like, I just want to go on some search engine and search for it to find it, whatever this investment is tracking, and they can't do it. And so what the Nasdaq Fund Network does is that we provide the infrastructure to create a standardized identifier. And we start with the investment vehicles, right? So you can pull up a mutual fund using the same identifier on your Charles Schwab account, or when you're searching it on Yahoo or Google, right? We have that service for other instruments as well. You see that in other areas. We mentioned models, right? So a model portfolio is basically like a paper portfolio that a strategist or a portfolio manager creates to kind of create a strategy that they're able to track over time, that has performance, that they're able to update. These models are then often tracked via managed accounts, right? So think like a unified managed account or a separately managed account. And so a lot of portfolio managers and asset managers have hundreds, if not thousands, of these model portfolios. And they don't have an identifier, right? So if you have someone who's talking about a model strategy and the individual investor or the advisor wants to go find it, they can't, right? And so what we want to do is create an identifier for these strategies that can be found and accessed across other mediums and other platforms that is standardized.
So let me ask you a quick question about that. So if I have a model, I have something that's identifiable. It's a fund, it's a model, what have you, and I come to you and I say, I want it to be listed on your network. Where does it automatically end up being visible? Like, do I need to ask you to put it in certain places, or if once I'm on the network, it's universally available everywhere where you publish? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have, because we've had this, the mutual fund business for so long, since the mid-1980s, we've been providing these searchable symbols for mutual funds. So we have all of kind of the pipes already outlined. So when a new asset class comes in, like a model, for example, it comes in the exact same way the mutual funds come in. It takes a little bit of time just to work with the vendors to pick up this this new feed. But it's going to go down to Yahoo Finance and Bloomberg and Refinitiv. So both over 700 different platforms that you can now do model due diligence on, which you've never been able to do in the past. So
so that's meaningful, because we had a situation once. We created an index and we were calling Yahoo Finance separately, and we were calling Market Watch separately, and it was very, very difficult to get somebody that actually could make a decision to push the information through. And so you guys are a shortcut through all that across the whole spectrum of publishers.
That's why we're here, right? I think, but it does open up some questions, right? Because a managed account is very different than, let's say, a structured product. A structured product is very different than a mutual fund. A mutual fund is even different than another, let's say, investment company, which is a UIT, right? So you do have some data points and characteristics that are specific to each investment vehicle. So it is the job of the product team, as well as the operations team, as well as the technology teams, to make sure that we are capturing the right data points. And more importantly, that our sales and relationship managers who are working with these accounts make sure that the downstream clients, these data vendors, are able to pick up these new data points, right? Because that's important, is that we need to make sure that the infrastructure is flexible, that we can ingest all this different data via structured products or mutual funds, and make sure that our downstream clients can pick them up as well. So it's, there's constantly having those conversations. It's constantly innovating, and it's constantly making sure that we are putting the right data out there for each investment vehicle or asset class.
There's tremendous value today. I don't care what business you are, to being found someplace on the web. So let me pull that thread a little farther that Ramsey kind of started taking us down. We have a lot of investment advisors who listen to this program. They do retirement planning. Maybe they sell some annuities. Maybe they've got they've got an RA or they're an IR someplace. Supposedly, imagine I'm an RIA, and I've got my own model that's running someplace. Can I get this up on the NFN? Can I get it so my client could actually find their portfolio performance and track the performance on their iPhone on their favorite stock tracker?
The answer is yes, right? We're able to take that model value, be able to track a value for it, and then be able to distribute that data out there, right? Kind of in its raw form. Now, we're not distributing holdings or anything like that. It's just really kind of tracking a value for this hypothetical portfolio. And so the answer is yes. Now, we don't have to get into today, but the regulatory environment is changing in the way that that performance can be kind of distributed and marketed, and so there are some separate conversations we can have about that. But to answer your question, yes, I mean, it would be no different than a large asset manager versus an RIA. Now, they're regulated differently, but for the most part, if we can take that model value, put it on the Nasdaq Fund Network, and then get it out there, that strategy will be able to be identifiable or identified and discovered. And Paul, you brought up a good point about the internet, right? It's like, what has replaced newspapers, right? We started off talking about newspapers. Well, it's the internet, right? And so that opened up a whole new market for this type of data. And so search engine optimization is an important, question that a lot of asset managers and strategists need to answer, right? How will their strategies be discovered? Because we know that the way products are being distributed is changing, right? It's not just this old wholesaler model, right? That's evolved. And so we've done something exciting in Europe where you have, the UCITS funds, which is kind of their kind of fund structure in Europe. Well, they don't have standardized identifiers, right, on like a ticker level, right? So you can pull up a long digit ISIN, but you don't have what we have in the U.S. where it's like, X, 5 characters. And so we're bringing this service to Europe. And one of the key value props there is search engine optimization, is that by having an identifier, having a symbol, it's much easier for an investor to find a strategy online, which is typically where they're doing the research anyway.
So in terms of your business model, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, to what extent, what it takes to actually be listed. Is there a screening function? Do people have to, somehow justify having a position on your network? And the next sort of follow on to that is, ultimately who pays for your service? Is it the people that are listing or the people that are receiving, or some combination of both?
Yeah, for the models, the only kind of identifier that we need is that they're GIPS compliant firms. So we're only working with GIPS compliant firms.
What is GIPS? I'm sorry.
GIPS stands for, Ben Meyer, is it the global, do you know the actual acronym for that, GIPS?
Or even just what GIPS does. What do they make you do? What is their compliance function?
I'll let Ben dig into it.
So basically, it's a performance standards, right? So
yeah.
It is brought by the CFA, so provides performance standards and audited for asset managers, RAs, separately managed accounts. So it's a standardized way of reporting performance. And what we're trying to make sure is that these firms are kind of vetted, right? And so by having this kind of compliance box checked, we know that these models have gone through that auditing process. And so that's one standard we have for the models. With mutual funds, you have to be an investment company, you have to be a mutual fund company. Same thing with like UITs, structured products, et cetera. So there is like a vetting process there. And also operationally, like we need to make sure that we have these operational processes and checks in place. And so we can't serve everyone, but we are able to serve those that we're able to get the data from, that have gone through some different check boxes on our side, and then we're able to get that data out there, right? So we're not just going to take anyone off the street, right? So we have to go through some processes there. But in terms of standardizing it, as long as we get the data and we're able to capture it and then put an identifier on it and then distribute it, that's what we provide. From a business standpoint, we serve both, right? So there is a registration fee, for these investment products, and then there's also, some data fees, downstream, right? Because there is a complex process of capturing the data, cleansing the data, and then distributing the data.
There's no question you earn it. You earn it for sure, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's good, but it's look, we provide a service, right, to asset managers and strategists, and we provide a service to the downstream investment platforms and the vendors and the investors, right? And I think that's the key, is that there needs to be transparency in this industry. We're not the only ones who have that mission, right? There's a lot of firms out there, either data vendors or practitioners. We're just part of that equation, right? Where we believe that these strategies need to be found, discovered, and discovered on an even playing field. And some strategies need to be behind closed doors if they're like kind of institutional or black box potentially, but the majority of them are being used by a retail investor. I can't stress that enough, right? I mean, think about this. Investors in the United States are relying on their 401k. They need to be able to find their strategies either on their broker, on their account, let's say whoever they're using or the company uses, or elsewhere, right? Whether it's being able to find it on their Apple iWatch or be able to search it on Google, and that's what we provide.
So like how far are we in that journey? So like sitting in your shoes, you've got a very clear mission. You want to provide this transparency across a wide variety of products, here in the US and internationally. And it sounds like you already have, sounds like you have a lot of market share and a lot of coverage, but what's left to do? Are we early days? Is this mature, or is this early in the cycle of actually having the level of coverage you think should exist in this market?
It's early days, right?
Yeah.
So, I think, in the more mature areas of the market, right? So think like mutual funds, right? UITs. I mean, we see new kind of asset classes kind of emerging that, these, investment companies are providing exposure to. So that's new and exciting. In the model space, right? With the global investment performance standards, with the GIPS, that's new, right? If you think about these thousands of models that are out there, it's a really growing space for financial advisors who are plugging their clients into these models, and we need to make sure that we provide transparency there. So it's that data is available elsewhere, that they can be vetted and have a third party where you're able to see performance or at least track it. That's early days. The funds in Europe providing identifiers, that's early days. Two exciting areas, we just partner with Luma Financial Technologies to bring identifiers to structured products, right? So, for the longest time, structured products, which have a lot of utility, in the way that they're able to, kind of augment risk a little bit, kind of change the investment outcome, through downside protection, et cetera. There was no central identifier, right? There was no single symbology that was being used where you could go find a structured product vehicle across different platforms, or let alone even on like important financial research platforms. So we have a partnership with Luma, and they're getting their data available, on the Morningstar Advisor workstation, where basically, these products are now merging and creating a really unique experience. And I think that opens up the doors to other, investment vehicles that don't have an identifier that you would think would not be early days, because why didn't they have one to begin with? But, you mentioned annuities, right? The way that annuities are being used by, advisors, that's changing where, the wholesaling models now become more like a consultative, right? And so they're consulting and providing guidance, but at the end of the day, the advisor is ultimately making the decision and is using different platforms to do research and find performance, and maybe having a single identifier there would improve the user experience. And so, Ramsey, it's a long-winded answer, but it's early days.
Sure.
But I think that's important because, what makes this industry so dynamic is that it's constantly changing, right? The needs of investors are constantly changing. And what we open up the conversation with is that, technology is evolving, right? We started off with newspapers, then we have the internet. Well, now that's changed a little bit, where we're not going to get into Web 3.0 in the metaverse, but the way that users are consuming information in the future is going to be very different than what it is today. And so NFN will at least be able to play a part in that by providing a standardized identification service to get that data out there.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word annuity, so I've got to push a little harder here. So this is a harder question for you, but you may not be that hard for you, which is. What are the opportunities here over the next couple of years? If imagine you're talking to one of our the guy in our company who develops the new products, or you're talking to some of our distributors, you're talking to advisors. What are the big opportunities?
Yeah, so I think the opportunities that we see right now, a lot of it is the way that retail investors are kind of investing. I think that's where the opportunity is. And the elephant in the room is, the retirement space. And so I think the opportunities for us is that, I'm not going to get Ramsey and Paul, this better, but I did see a headline, and that's something that we are exploring. But, we're beginning to see other type of investment vehicles being used in retirement accounts, right? I think annuities being one of them. And so if that's the case, we need to have a standardized identification process for these new investment vehicles in these new accounts, right? We were able to, and Aidan can go into really in depth about this, but the CITs, the collective investment trust, right? There was no really central identification for these CITs, and so NFN, brought that service to market. Aidan, if you want to go in there, I mean, that's important too.
Yeah, I think the opportunity for annuities is very similar to kind of what happened with CITs. The plan participants need to have access to those CIT plans, regardless of whether they're trading them on a daily basis. They're obviously not, but that exact same way, CITs, they started moving down market into kind of the small and medium sized plans. Companies started lowering minimums, and they just became a lot more prevalent in 401k plans. That seems to be kind of the trajectory for annuities as well. And so to have that transparency where the record keepers are, incorporating these searchable symbols in their marketing materials and fact sheets and things like that, that's important. So I see a very similar trajectory as the CITs.
Ramsey, do you agree?
Sure, I agree completely. I mean, I guess I'll start with the notion that for the entire 401k industry there's very little penetration in it from guaranteed income solutions. So I and my company, we're a very strong believer that needs to change. We also think that it needs to be part of the default, so that you will. The default strategy is usually a target date fund. We think those target date funds should include an annuity component. We think that the delivery method should be through CITs because they're most cost effective. And because there's an ongoing management need, right? Essentially, there's a glide path that you have to manage and adjust, on a very regular basis. And you need sort of daily information passing from record keepers to glide path managers to all the various sort of folks in the value chain there. And to be able to do that based on an efficient way of actually, one, determining value, and two, being able to source it and find it, it makes all the sense in the world. So one of the things that I think is often lost in this industry is that we spend a lot of time creating really interesting and complex machines, if you will, or products. But ultimately, a lot of what customers want, and frankly a lot of intermediaries want, is just to be able to see what's going on when it's going on. And so that simple element of transparency, I think, is way more sort of primal to the success of everything we're trying to do than sometimes we as an industry realize. So I'll have to say that I'm a believer in what you're doing, because I think it's super important. I think lack of transparency kills a lot of great ideas.
Yeah, well, and I'll just add on. It's timing for our conversation is great. We just did a survey of all our top producers around what's driving them to make recommendations, what makes them feel more comfortable with making one strategy recommendation versus another. And there's been a lot of pressure from some of our distributors to make it very transparent as to renewal rates on different crediting strategies. So that's a whole nother conversation here. But I'm curious, if you went through, I don't know, Ramsey, how many FIAs do you think there are today? I think I've seen some huge numbers. There must be.
There have to be hundreds.
Hundreds. Let's say there are 200. 200. Each one may have at least 5 strategies at this point, right? So we're talking the magnitude of at least a couple, maybe 1,000, 2,000 different strategies. Ben, what's the penetration like? What percentage do you think of these strategies inside FIAs are running through your network at this point?
Yeah, so right now, I think we're Aidan like less than 100 kind of strategies, and then that we kind of labeled as annuities that are registered on the Nasdaq Fund Network and have their data being distributed, or more importantly, have their data kind of connected with a central identifier published by NFN. So I think the penetration right now is really low, I would argue. But I think the good news is, Paul, is that it's growing, right? As that number is much higher. I don't know the percentage than it was, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so I think it's only a matter of time. And I think part of it is that, we talked about transparency being so important for investments and these different investment vehicles we've been talking about. But I think also an important layer is education, right? It's like we have to be able to educate, normally we think about educating the individual investor, but we also need to educate the asset managers, right? And these FIAs that, hey, this service is available. This is what's provided. This is why it's important. And so we have a big job at NFN, right? So, and that's part of it. And also just, educating downstream investors as well. And so the penetration is low, but we believe that there's an opportunity for it because we've seen that number grow slowly. And, hopefully, with this conversation, it kind of opens up, hey, there are some more possibilities. We need to have an identifier for these products.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, here's a problem, Ramsey. You agree or disagree with me, which is, God, just try to find the performance on these funds. If I'm an advisor in the field, I'm going to look up the indices. Now, I'm assuming through NFN, are you tracking the underlying index, or are you tracking the index and what the crediting strategy is on top of that now?
To my knowledge, it's going to be the strategy on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So from our standpoint, like we don't, NASDAQ does have kind of an index service, but NFN is not that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I think what do I have to do right now? I would have to go, unless I use a couple of software services, some of them we've had on the show. It's really tough. I mean, I have to go to the website for that whoever is managing the index. Then I got to go back to the insurance company and figure out where. Let me see your crediting strategies. It's a real manual process to do this, or I've got to rely on one carrier's illustrations. Period.
Yeah, it is. And, I experienced that a little bit on my days on the research side, working with, financial advisors, more so in the other end of the annuity space on the variable annuity side of, okay, these funds are available, through this carrier, but, why can I not see these funds on your research platform, right? For charting and performance, purposes. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's an area of opportunity. We would love to have these conversations, with these FIAs and, have Aidan and our NFN team, talk about this. in a more formal setting. And because at the end of the day, it's, there is clearly a problem. We believe that we have a solution. And I think, but what's important about it, though, is that, as I said in the beginning, each asset class, each instrument is different. And, from a product standpoint, right, most important thing about, being a product manager, it's, the voice of the customer, right? Make sure we are delivering the right product, for the customer to solve a certain solution. And so, we're happy to have these conversations, say, hey, do we need to make improvements? Do we need to make enhancements? Are we really tracking the right part of, let's say, this product? And so I think that's important about NFN, is that we tackle it with a really client customer centric angle. And so if there is a problem, we believe we have a solution, but let's have that conversation.
Yeah, I guess this is going to sound like it's coming out of the blue, but this weekend, as I was sort of thinking through the questions we have, I got this survey from Apple Music. Kind of interesting. Like, how do these two connect? Well, they clearly were testing. What do they do with their Apple Music? Because in some ways, they kind of do what you're doing. Is they provide discoverability for these songs. They kind of have a way for people to monetize their music. What else do they do with it? And one of the services they were clearly testing was, hey, does Paul want to create his own radio station? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure Ramsey will listen to it, let alone anybody else. If I were,
I'll sign up, Paul. Don't worry.
You'll sign up, okay, and send me a half a penny here. The other one was curation and recommendations, and they really had a lot of questions around like, gee, why do you come in? How do you find the music? What are you doing here? If you looked at, let's say, partners you wish you had. Are people doing enough with your network to really make this thing like totally own the marketplace? Do you have are there partners you wish you had over the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I love bringing in kind of outside concepts from different industries, right? Especially, from an NFN standpoint, as we think about, we are a platform, right? We're no different than a lot of these different marketplaces and platforms that exist. Think, Amazon, think Apple Music, you name it. And so while, Apple's able to, provide recommendations based off of like your preferences and how you've used the data, NFN, we're not going to be doing that, right? And we leave that up to the investment professionals, the advisors, the institutions who are taking this data to make the informed decision, right? We do provide the data. We don't provide the algorithm per se. But, that is changing a little bit in terms of, can we get the data out there in new and different ways? To answer the one question is that, yes, I believe our data partners are using the data in the right way and in a very creative, innovative way, right? There's any number of platforms that Aidan mentioned that are using this data, analyzing it, creating new analytics and data points, and getting it in front of the end investor in unique ways. However, we are working on some initiatives within NFN to make sure that we are able to get our data out there in new, different ways, right? So, we have some unique things that we're working on internally. One is with the partner in Europe. The website, is going to be able to take Nasdaq Fund Network data and get it out there and allow comparisons of different investment vehicles, right? So, we know that an important question is, how do I decide between this ETF or that mutual fund? Let me compare performance and analytics and ratings and different things like that. So we're working on an initiative like that. Hope to be rolling out in the end of October. And we're always up for new partnerships, right? So I don't have that dream, Paul, of hey, this is that right partner at the right place at the right time.
Right.
But I do know that if they are reaching the investor and doing it in the right way, which is providing transparency, they're doing it with integrity, making sure that the data is labeled right. And if they're providing some added value with analytics or things like that, that's the perfect partner, right? So don't have a good answer for you in terms of who it is, but I can tell you kind of what they would look like. And so we're always exploring that because what we want to do is to help get the data from these asset managers out there. And so we do that with the NFN infrastructure and getting it out to the important players like Morningstar and Bloomberg, Refinitiv, and Yahoo that Aidan mentioned, but also some of these up and coming research platforms. I think, we talked about newspapers being that fintech back in the 80s, right? But, we've seen this explosion of wealth tech and fintech lately, right? With all these new websites and apps, I think interesting one would be Robinhood, right? Who would have thought that, all of a sudden commission-free trading, and you can, trade a stock no differently than you can trade, a cryptocurrency. Well, I think that's going to be changing in some of these, older, more mature investment areas, right? I think mutual funds, there are even some, fintech, trading platforms that, they don't even have mutual funds available, right? I think that could change because we know that there's plenty of utility and benefit in, some of these investment vehicles as well. So the future is exciting, Paul, but the cool thing is that the same concepts and problems that Apple Music is trying to solve, we're trying to solve that as well, but just with, investment data.
Ramsey, I don't know.
No, I think this has been great. I mean, as I sort of said before, like at the end of the day, if you're creating a universal identifier that is broadly available through multiple channels, so that people that create the underlying products don't have to actually go out and try and convince every channel to sort of carry their information, I think that's extremely valuable to the vendor, to sort of the product creator. I think it's valuable to the people that are in the middle of the ecosystem. All right. So that's all the various intermediaries that are involved. I think it's very valuable to the consumer, because consumers want to see, they put their hard-earned money to work. They want to see how it's doing from one day to the next. So if you are accomplishing all of that, and you're sort of broadening that kind of coverage, that's I think it's a very important service.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's been a great conversation. Aidan, Ben, what's the best way for people to reach out and get in touch with you? Because I think a lot of different types of listeners may be curious about how to work with you or engage with you.
Yeah. Well, they can email Nasdaq Fund Network at nasdaq.com. Ask any questions they might have. I'd be happy to set up a call and dig in with them. Or they can email me directly, aidan.shue@nasdaq.com as well. We'd be happy to kind of showcase our service to anyone who's interested.
Okay, terrific. We'll put ththose in the notes. Ben, Aidan, thank you. Ramsey, appreciate it. And I can't believe summer's over. And guess time to fasten the seatbelt and push on to the end of the year. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.